Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for April 4th, 2025. I'm Benji Fisher, sharing my screen and moderating. And also here are Aaron McHale, Ralph Kohler, and Thomas Howell. So I'd like to talk today about providing additional methods of navigating the admin interface. This is issue 3325034. And it's an intentionally open-ended issue. It's not just about rearranging things in the admin menu, but having other ways of finding your way around the admin interface. The last time we brought this up was just a couple of weeks ago on March 22nd. And as I said, then we're still talking about talking or coming up with a framework for further discussion. A few suggestions that have been made are to rearrange the menu, to add related links. So for example, when you're editing a, a page node, you might have a link to the structure for configuring page nodes. Some sort of search interface, such as we already have from the Contrib Coffee module. So those are just some of the ideas that have been brought up on this issue. But sort of to focus the discussion, we talked about goals, criteria, metrics. So a metric would be fewer clicks. A goal would be lower cognitive load. A way of measuring would be a card sorting exercise or tree testing, so UX research. And another criterion is that whatever framework we come up with, it should be extendable by other modules. So for today's discussion, I think when we made that comment, it was sort of at the end of the meeting. But if we're prepared to spend the whole meeting talking about it today, just a couple of questions. Should we focus on the new user to Drupal, or should we focus on the content editor who has some experience with Drupal? So should we focus on the new user experience or the experienced user experience? And I think we might have different goals in mind depending on which of those we focus on. So where do you want to start? Go ahead, Thomas.
Not ironically, but oddly enough, for school, I actually chose to build a new site using Drupal recently. And uh, I am an experienced X support type person who's dealt with Drupal for years, but I tackled something I hadn't done before, which was building a custom module in Drupal. And I realized as I was going through the interface that I still struggle to separate language from the admin interface itself, like where to go in there. Because part of the project, it's a group project, I had to explain to other people what was going on. And so it may be counterintuitive, but I think there is value to be gained from focusing on new users because there are things that we each know because we've dealt with them. But when you look holistically at the entire admin UI, even experienced people have parts of it that they may never use. And so I think it'll be easier to try and put ourselves in the mindset of someone new and try to look at the whole UI from that perspective. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, and that's sort of one of the arguments made for accessibility, that things that we do to make sites easier to use for um, uh, blind people or keyboard users, those things actually have benefits for all users. Anything that we do for simplicity is a good thing for everyone. So you'd like to focus on the new user experience.
Correct.
Okay. That's I'm certainly open to that. Um, and do you also want to focus on the terminology we use, or just sort of the navigation aspect?
I think we should focus on the navigation aspect, but it's really critical to note that um, it's very difficult to separate the two things. It's just as advanced or experienced users, um, it's easier for us if we know. So just to give you it to ground it for you, um, in the module, we just wanted to add some JavaScript. We wanted a simple path page with some JavaScript on it, and we ran into tremendous trouble getting our module to work. Like I thought, because I was able to hack it to work by dropping it in a node as contact, but when I tried to understand how building the custom module worked, it was just drastically different. And a lot of the language was new to me because it was stuff that I hadn't dealt with before. So I think that, um, again, the challenge is when we've taught ourselves what the language is in the admin UI. So when we talk about making it searchable, like the coffee module, that assumes that you know what language, what term you're looking for. So keeping that in mind as we organize and structure things or talk about how to organize and structure it is important. So we just need to kind of dissociate from our lived experience and try and put ourselves in the mindset of someone who's new to a lot of these things. That's all. I see Ralph has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Ralph.
Just wanted to add that from my perspective, you can't separate language from the structure or how things are functioning or how you navigate. So I would tackle it at once together. Otherwise, consider it problematic. And as I've mentioned before, I still think this approach like the uh, UX Magic or OOUX approaches that are bridging the gap between language and how you navigate and the calls to action might be a reasonable way forward.
Okay, I'm not familiar with either of those frameworks. UX Magic and OO, what was it?
OOUX, object-oriented UX.
Ha.
So yeah, it it isn't explained in a in one or two sentences. It would take a bit longer. I can prepare something for another meeting, but yeah,
Or maybe if you just, in context as we discuss things, if you mention e either of these frameworks, that might be the most useful way.
yeah,
Okay, so let's try to take the point of view of a new user, and we have the advantage that Thomas has been interacting with new users, which is always helpful. And I guess think in terms of the navigation, but also be willing to bring up the terminology as we do that. Um, so it would be nice if um, if someone would tell us the sort of tests that they're using for user testing with new users, but in the absence of that, um, can we come up with some sort of task that imagine that a new user has this um, Drupal site? Should I be starting with the Umami demo as I have here, or should I be starting with Drupal CMS? Should I be starting with just Drupal core? I guess the answer to that depends on the task we're giving them. And maybe we should start with the task. And is this new user a site builder like in the Dries noted Barcelona? The idea was someone building a site from Drupal CMS. So a new user trying to build a site, but maybe we should also think about a new user who's a content editor. Um, maybe that's a good place to start. Imagine you're a new user, you have an existing site like the Umami, and I guess you don't necessarily start here on your user page. There is, by the way, in Drupal CMS the dashboard initiative, which says that this is a terrible place to land when you first log in. Let's give people a dashboard, but sort of a standard task is for the new user to say, hey, we have this text on the home page. Why don't you go ahead and edit that? Does that seem like a good place to start?
Sure.
So say for whatever reason, we're given the task of editing this text. This delicious bake is super quick to prepare and an ideal midweek meal for all the family. Um, and maybe we decide that we want to have more alliteration. So instead of delicious bake, we want to change it to delicious dish. Um, so that is a task for a new content editor. And how is the content editor supposed to find a way to change that text? And does that involve the admin UI, the admin menu, or other parts of the admin interface? Go ahead, Ralph.
Just a question up front. In that scenario, is it likely that a content editor is starting off in Umami and then trying to adjust that existing page, or does the person start with a blank page? Or
Well, I'm imagining that there is an existing site, right? The site has already been built. The site already has content on it. It's
okay,
already live. And would it actually be umami? Of course not. But I think umami is a reasonable proxy, a reasonable
okay, placeholder,
stand-in
okay.
for that. Thomas?
So I don't know why this popped into my head, but I'm going to try and describe it as best I can. You mentioned dashboard initiative, and dashboard or not, if I were someone who wanted to start working for the first time on a website, what I'd want to do is get to where the content editing page was. And I know that is a different paradigm than kind of where Drupal has gone for at least 10 years since I think about Drupal 8, um, which is the edit in place. Because when I look at this page, I don't know how to edit this particular page in place. But the first thing that I would think someone wants when they are a content editor is they would land on the page with all of the content. So I would assume that the first place you'd want to go would be content as a content editor. Now I don't know there if that's what I'm envisioning, but that would be the first place. Like if you were going, I don't know many people who click through a website to then get to the content they're going to edit, where it's more likely that they would be going to a content page and then saying, okay, this is all of my content. I want to do a particular page that's listed there. So,
Okay, so So one way of getting there is through content. If we did have a dashboard, then the content editor would have a link to this, or perhaps a small version of this in a block on that dashboard. Um, and let me mention that also editing the text on the home page is kind of especially difficult if we're on any page other than the home page. We should have the edit link, although I'm not seeing it.
On top, in the top bar, blue button.
Oh, thank you. That's new.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and we don't have that on the home page. That's interesting. But I see Simo, you've had your hand up for a while. What do you want to say?
Yeah, I was thinking that, okay, somebody's talking. Yeah, so I was thinking that, well, actually, I was thinking first that if we want to, like, what's our goal here? Do we want to make things easier for someone who already has a site? And therefore, we could assume that they have someone who can kind of guide them through it. So there is someone helping them. Or if we want to, like, just start from the scratch, like thinking of someone who doesn't have anything ready, so how to start building it. Kind of, it's a little bit different approach, because I think one of the biggest problems is that people don't start using Drupal because the kind of, if they start doing it on their own, maybe they don't figure it out. So that's one idea. But about editing, I think one of the, if somebody starts to edit, starts as a content editor on an existing site, I guess one of the quite common tasks they get is that somebody sends them a link to a page, and then they, let's say that fix this page, and they give them links, and then I think in that way it might be kind of trying to get trying the easy way if we start thinking about the going through content, because I think a lot of people, they get links and then they need to open the page at the link, and then they need to figure out how to change that. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, to answer your first question, I think for today, I would like to talk about the case of an existing site, and then exactly the sort of task that you described in the second part of your question. That yes, the common editing task is that the site owner, the boss, whoever, doesn't think in terms of the back end, thinks in terms of the front end of the site, and sends, as you say, sends the content editor a link either to the home page or some interior page, and says, there's some text here that we want to rewrite. So yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of. That we're sort of starting on the front end of the site, and the content editor has to know, or has to figure out a way to edit that text. And one way to do it is to find the page through the backend, through the content page. Another way is through the edit button at the top of the page. And Thomas, what did you want to say?
In my use case, it was very strange, and I don't know how much this impacts other people because it's I guess, a newer paradigm. And I haven't tried DDEV, but we're using the Drupal Docker container, and everybody actually doesn't get a URL because your URLs are local, and so instead you kind of have to know how the site's built because you're passing the container around. You're just basically editing on your local desktop. So uh, I like, even for someone who's new, because the number one problem that I saw was that it really broke people's heads how something I'd always just took for granted, which was the view, edit, not history, but the revisions tabs that would insert themselves. Moving that to the top, as it does here, addresses that major problem that I saw using what I thought was the latest 11 build. Um, so I think that uh, I don't know that everyone just gets a URL link to a particular page. Like that's just not anything that the group I was dealing with was experiencing, and it really was more like I hate how the three dots there hide everything that we can do. I understand why that's there, um, but that hides information. Um, but it doesn't change the way the site looks, and so that approach solves was causing my beginners trouble. And so maybe that's something to keep in mind. Um, Something that's weird. So when we talked about the coffee tab, if I wanted to edit a page, um, I would have assumed I would type in edit and like the page I wanted to look for if I were using a search. Um, and I don't pages like nodes don't have ready visible information that says I'm looking at this page, which is a function of how we deal with nodes and how we architect layouts. Um, because if someone came to this page and they wanted to edit something that was in a block somewhere, um, it is not intuitive necessarily that they have to go to other things. Like people still think in the paradigm of a URL path, the route is the same thing as an entire node. And so that was definitely conceptually a problem that I had dealing with people new. So just sending a URL is insufficient for the people I was working with in my instance.
So I think that what you're describing using a container that gets passed around is pretty unusual, and it's sort of the way you're working for your class exercises. And I think that having a live site with URLs that can be accessed from anywhere on the web is really more realistic and more common. Um, but your suggestion, say that you want to be able to type into some sort of search interface or some sort of chatbot interface, I want to edit the page about cocktails or the page about mocktails, I guess. Um, that's an idea that I think is worth exploring. Um, but Ralph, go ahead.
Thank you. Just one note first about the three dots. That is something we've previously raised as a problem when we've looked at the navigation in the top bar before, uh, a few months ago. But they think they went with that yeah, closet approach, shoving everything into the three dots for now. But it should be definitely easier, accessible, and clearer, and all the call to actions accessible in some way. But one other point, could you go to the front page, to the tab with the front page, please? Because there is one assumption in here that shows off that it's basically people that are more familiar with Drupal talking about it, because it is, for one, not. Oh no, it's an assumption for someone who is not familiar with Drupal to go to the content. But in here, there's also the question: could it be simply just a block? that could be also the case. You can't distinguish just based on your visual feedback here, what is a block and what is content, or what is based on a content type.
Right. So the home page again is different from most interior pages. That more of the content on the home page is blocks than is typical for an interior page. An interior page, most of this text is from the node, and only these things in the sidebar are separate blocks. But yeah, again, the task given to a content editor, normally isn't going to be coming from someone who understands that distinction.
Yeah.
The someone who doesn't edit the site, looks at the front page and says, "Oh, let's hear it for carrots. Let's change that text on this page." Um,
Um,
or Mango-licious, that's a little too cutie, change that text. And the person assigning the task to the content editor may not know or care about the distinction between text in the node body and text in a block. Go ahead.
yeah. Just one thought, and it circles back to the OOUX and UX magic. So basically, it should be visually more clear on which content is based on which concept. So the concept of a block or the concept of a content type, and that is not directly apparent on a visual level.
Yeah, so of course for an anonymous user, that's a good thing. You don't want to distinguish between what comes in as a block and what comes in as content. But maybe we should have some visual cues for logged in users.
Yeah.
We currently have the little pencil icon, the contextual links that pops up.
But that brings you only to the other context where you're able to edit it then, or you're able to edit it in place, but still directly apparent what concept it is. It's not clear directly that way.
Right. So maybe we should have some more visual cues
Yeah.
as to the different sorts of content on a page.
Yeah. To provide some sort of situational awareness to the person editing.
Right.
And again, going back to someone unaware of all those concepts and Drupal in general, it's overwhelming and it looks also homogeneous. And that way, if someone clicks on, for example, the edit button for a node and getting to a node and getting edit button for a block, and all those pages look also sort of familiar. And that way you easily get lost in between all those pages. And it's something we've ideated in the context of accessibility in the context of the header. At the moment, the header looks homogeneous in between the different sections and the different concepts you have. For example, for appearance page, it looks identical to a content type or to a configuration page or the extend page. You always have the grayish background in Claro. You have the H1 and the breadcrumb. But visually, just with a glimpse of an eye, you're unable to determine in which rough context you are currently in.
So I'm not sure. Are you talking about this area up here?
No, about the header, not the top bar, but the header underneath. That the grayish background and the breadcrumb with home, skip,
Okay.
the spirits with delicious mocktails, and the edit and the H1 with edit article skip. And if you go to different pages, extend appearance, a content type, or the content overview page, that header always looks the same, except you have a different path in the breadcrumb and a different H1 title, but still visually it's more or less the same. So you're unable, for example, if you would have, for example, a color or a certain background pattern or something like that, or an icon, so that you basically just on a visual context, you don't have to, at the moment, you have to read to
Uh,
determine the context
okay.
and to
So you're saying
process.
there's too much consistency
Yeah,
in this, that we have a breadcrumb, we have a title, and you'd like to have more visual indications that here I'm on the edit page for a node, and here I'm on the content page.
yeah. Just visual cues that you, at the moment, you are required to read and to process and skim through the entire H1 or the rest of the page to get a rough idea where you're currently at. And usually, for example, a good example for me, if you go please to structure and content to a content type, a certain article content type, for example.
Manage fields
Yeah,
or
manage fields, please. An example here is the primary tabs. Those have a fixed order with edit, manage fields, manage form display, manage display, and that underline. And that way, that due to the fact that it's in fixed order and the underline and the boldish, bluish coloring of the active primary tab, that way I don't have to read. I have only a visual cue and I know, okay, at the moment we are at the manage form display and I immediately know the context. And just as an example that provide additional ways to determine the context you're in. And that is just an example. And to have something more holistic for the entire for the entire header, for figuring out which context you're in currently would be very, very helpful.
okay. So you're saying that there are good visual cues for the primary tabs,
Yeah,
the underline, the change in color. Um, and you'd like to have a similar visual cue for the area above that with the
yeah.
um, breadcrumbs.
Yeah, so that you're able to distinguish your current context and you don't have to, and you're not required to read and to process where you're currently at.
So let's drill down on that context bit. How many different contexts do you have in mind? What are they?
One overall context would be definitely structure. One definitely configuration, one people.
So it's somehow
The top level menu items, it's debatable if you want to have a single context for blocks, content, files, media at once, or if you want to separate blocks and content, and if you want to have something separate for create, it's debatable. But yeah, in general, the top level menu items would be a rough rule of thumb.
okay, not a perfect description of what's a context, but
Yeah.
a good first approximation.
If we want to go crazy, I'm thinking something more radical change, like would be monitoring and creating and building, so that kind of a different kind of structure probably today, what we have today. So it would be something like people who have different tasks, so based on what people are expected to do. So that's another thing, but I think might probably not better, but it's something like we could mirror against that kind of structure.
Ah, so depending on my role, that's a constant, or depending on the current task that I'm doing, you would want the interface to adapt and show different things. Is that what you're saying, Simo? Simo, you're still muted.
Yeah, I was thinking like depend on what kind of things you are doing. So it would be kind of a model view controller style thing, but you could depending on what things you want to change, so that when you are editing content, you don't actually accidentally change structure. So that's what's happening now, but and also so that you don't need to go to that when you want to see when content was changed, maybe you don't need to go to places where you edit those. So it's a bit far-fetched. So it's just an idea. So it's not well thought yet, but there are
Okay.
different kinds of things way to structure.
Go ahead, Ralph.
Two remarks in the regard. For one, there is already an issue about or the idea of limiting or have a different set of top-level menu items for different roles. So, for example, a content editor has a completely different navigational sidebar and available top-level menu items there. And about the contextual calls to action available in a certain context, isn't that what the issue Aaron created is basically about? And that is ideally where the top bar is going or should be going, meaning that it provides the follow-up actions in the current context where you're currently in at. For example, if you go to the edit page, please, where you have the oh no, it was the other page where the edit button was in the top bar.
So that was the view page for
Oh, there, yeah. And having there 2 to 3 either actionable buttons where you have direct actions or you have links where you go next to. So it is not a juggling of the navigational sidebar, but you're able to have basically actual user journeys for certain tasks.
So I'm not sure I get your point. So you're saying that the top bar is trying to provide that sort of context?
Yeah. It should be, or that is the future goal to provide some sort of contextual place where the contextual actions and links should go to. And that was also the, yeah, I think the idea Aaron outlined in the issue.
Going back to the issue we started with, um, yeah, Aaron has often talked about related or deep links, and um, and one question about that is where to put them. And that could certainly be one of the uses for this top bar,
Yeah.
that if I'm currently editing an article page, I guess I'm not editing it at the moment, I'm looking at the front end, but if I edit it, then this top bar might be a good place to put links to the structure page. So if I'm editing it and I say, what? There's the tags taxonomy, but I also need a link to some other taxonomy, um, then it would be nice to be able to get there
Yeah.
quickly. But I'm sort of totally going outside the focus of the content editor that we agreed on at the start. But
Yeah, but basically you would that way you would have in your navigational sidebar, you have the overall hierarchical structure, which is also a escape route in case you are lost in your contexts. And in the top bar, you could basically have here basically your task and your route where you are directly able in context head to desirable other tasks or follow-up tasks you want to apply. And in case you don't find anything, yeah, the escape route is the navigational sidebar. And I guess it would be quite powerful, hard to set up and to come to a conclusion about the links to provide, the call to actions to provide in the context in question every time, but still it would be powerful.
yeah, and I think that's a good way of thinking of things that um, I guess it's often said that there should be more than one way to get to a given task, but in particular, um, a context sensitive way, but then also, as you say, an escape route.
Yeah.
If if the contextual way fails somehow to get to where you want to go, then you have some way, some hierarchical way of getting there.
Yep.
Um,
And that way you would also have a what so at the moment in the navigational sidebar, it's missing the active highlighting the active menu item. Because if you have that highlighted as well as providing some sort of visual context in the header, then it has also some, for people new to Drupal or with the technology in general, it has an educational purpose as well, because you learn slightly where you are currently that way, and you slightly grasp how the concepts are intertwined.
yeah, so editing a node page, that's not a path that you can really get to from the navigational menu. You can go to content and then select a page. But if we go to manage form display, right, even here we have the breadcrumbs, but structure in the admin menu is not highlighted.
Exactly. But then that is, I mean, provide visual cues, uh, providing situational awareness where you're currently at, that it's clearly communicated in several ways, not only relying on color, but also on other cues as well. So it's less reading, because that is one of the main gripes with the Drupal admin UI. It's mostly about reading and scanning. And if you have issues with your sensory with your eyes, then it becomes challenging.
And that gets back to one of the criteria, probably you're the one who suggested it, of lower cognitive load. as or
Yeah,
not.
the cognitive load was mostly about the processing, not necessarily with the visual, but yeah, it's nevertheless it's included there as well. I agree.
Okay, so we have a little less than 10 minutes left. Um, we should try to sort of summarize this discussion, decide what we should talk about next time. Um, so we've talked about a lot of ideas. We started with the idea of focusing on a new content editor given the task of changing some text on some page. That text might be node content. It might be in the sidebar from some block. Um, we talked about giving that content editor visual cues to distinguish between those two possibilities. Um, we talked about ways of getting to that content from the front end. So we have contextual links for the blocks. We have a contextual link for the node as a whole, and we also have the edit button at the top of the page. It might be frustrating if the content editor goes to that edit link and doesn't see these blocks that are in the sidebar. We talked about contextual clues, what could go in the sidebar, related tasks, um, highlighting the menu to give context. Um, so I guess we talked a lot about context. If you're on some other admin page, we talked about better ways of giving the context, and what the context is roughly described by the top level menu items. And I can imagine spending another hour just talking about context and card sorting exercises uh, to sort of narrow down um, what the different contexts are that we should indicate. And I think that something like that discussion has to happen before we talk about how to indicate those contexts. Anything else to say in summary?
Don't think so.
I don't think we came up with any actionable recommendations, did we?
I'm currently searching if I've already created an issue for the header to distinguish it.
Okay,
I can post it later if I find it. I think I have, but I'm not sure.
thank you. And any suggestions for where to pick up the discussion next time? Should we continue with this idea of an existing site and a new content editor? Should we think more in terms of a site builder? Should we have a different starting point instead of Umami? Should we start with Drupal CMS?
From my perspective, I don't think it shouldn't matter much if you're using standard or Umami or Drupal CMS. It's more about the underlying concepts. For testing an assumption in all of those three, it would be good, but as a starting point for ideating, I'm not sure if it's necessary to distinguish.
Um, so I guess the reason I'm thinking of the starting points is that for the task we imagined today, brand new content editor, go change this text on the front page. it's helpful to have a site that does have a home page and does have several nodes. And so Umami is a good starting point. If the task is not for a content editor to edit a page, but for a site builder to add an event content type, then the Umami is not such a good starting point because Drupal CMS might be better.
Okay, yeah, good. Good point.
So depending on what the task is, you know the starting point we give them can be tailored. So for next time, do you want to continue with thinking about the content editor role, similar tasks given to a content editor, or would you rather switch to a site building task?
I think if we look at that identification, identifying what is what, that's both for content editors and site builders. I think so. It's if we look at, then it might be that we can look to at the same time. But apart from that, I think one of the areas we can make a lot of progress, I think, is helping new site builders to learn to use Drupal, because the content editors are not the ones who adopt Drupal, but site builders and site builder content editors. So in that way, kind of strategically, I think improving site builders' experience or like lowering that bar is something that's quite useful for Drupal as a whole at the moment.
Okay. So maybe next time, instead of preparing an Umami site, I'll start with a Drupal CMS site, and we'll come up with a site builder task. Now, I guess I've I've long been a proponent of sort of the Lego approach that Drupal gives me tools and I can use those tools to build a lot of things. And sort of the goal of Drupal CMS is to move away from that and say, here are some common use cases, and we'll make it very easy to get started with those common use cases. So I guess I will take Drupal CMS as a starting point, um, but I'm inclined to go with the Lego block analogy. What can you build without having a recipe that does it for you? Go ahead, Ralph.
But isn't Drupal CMS still a Lego approach? But still, it's in. If you take the analogy of Lego, then Drupal CMS is simply a one box of Lego that provides a fixed outcome, and you can still able to flange on additional stuff to that. So
Yeah, you're right. So maybe sort of taking the two together, we can say apply an event recipe and then assign ourselves a task to tweak the site that we've built after applying that recipe.
yeah,
So the recipe is a starting point, not an ending point.
yeah, and just to add on that, and that is from my perspective one of the biggest problems I see. It's already overwhelming if you it's one problem with standard profile where if you install Drupal, you have a homogeneous looking thing that looks like nothing and incapable of anything. And to figure out what to add and how to add is complicated. But Drupal CMS highlights another extreme there. You have several recipes applied, and then it's overwhelming. You have tens of modules applied. to have the situation again, the situational awareness, what was applied, where is configured. It's overwhelming simply. And no matter if you take a look at the existing state at the, or again, on complex sites with content, it boils back again and again to situational awareness about the context you're currently in, what is there is Drupal running short from my perspective.
Okay.
It's sort of a litmus test, Drupal CMS.
Okay. So let's wrap it here. It's a little bit past the hour, so thanks for staying a little longer. And perhaps we'll look at the other issue that was brought up. Was it you, Ralph, who brought this
Yeah.
up? Maybe next week we'll start off with this, but then continue the discussion of navigating the admin UI. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a
Have
nice
a nice
weekend.
weekend.
You too.